Hey up. Right, I don't seem to have an awful lot of luck with the weather just lately. I had a cleaning product video to make yesterday, Monday, and as soon as I got my camera set up, it started to throw it down with rain. So, anyway, it's given me the opportunity to do something else about a subject that caught my eye over the weekend. There are two phrases that I don't think I'd heard that many times in my lifetime, but then in the last 3 years it seems to be in every other sentence that politicians utter. Follow the science. Trust the science. I made a video, I think it was within the last year, I can't remember the title of it now, there are such a lot of them on my portfolio, just cautioning people to question science, not to entirely trust science, because things don't always pan out to be as they appear. I think anybody above the age of 40 have seen these anomalies where science has been preached to you that we should do things a certain way, and then suddenly there's a complete about turn and we're told that that was wrong, or sometimes it's not even mentioned that we were told to do it that way. We're just told to do something else completely different. At first it leaves you scratching your head, but as you get older you realise that by and large science is far from empirical. Science is never settled, and it would certainly appear from where I'm standing that science has no accountability if they get things horribly wrong in a way that has affected a lot of people's lives. It just seems to get brushed under the carpet. Worst case scenario, those responsible sort of wreck their careers. But let's face it, they've made enough money by then not to have to worry about it too much. They can just retire quietly. The rest of us are left counting the cost, living with the consequences for years, even decades sometimes. Now, over the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen some remarkable, almost unbelievable policies from our governments, and I'm not just talking about the UK, this is a worldwide phenomenon. When it came to the pandemic, the scientific models demonstrated that the fatalities were going to run into the millions, many millions, but fatalities never reached anywhere near the figures projected by science. Scientists told our government that we had to lock the population down, and we dutifully followed that for well over a year. We all followed the guidelines and the laws dutifully, and yes, I was one of the proponents for doing as we were told. But the lockdowns didn't work, neither did the vaccines that science produced for us. And the whole world is now spiralling into a cost of living crisis because we trusted and followed the science. And that spectre that raised its head at the beginning of the pandemic, that the coronavirus, was actually leaked from a laboratory carrying out gain-of-function research, is once again gaining momentum with various governments, suggesting, of course, that the coronavirus was actually a product of science and not a natural occurring phenomenon. And now it comes to the phenomenon of global climate change and the net zero policies, once again evidenced by science, promising us a utopian future if we all live smaller, colder, poorer lives that to me look like a dystopian future. But our politicians tell us that we have to do this, it's necessary. Trust the science, we're following the science. Now, that last video that I referenced at the beginning of this video cautioned people to be sceptical of science, to read between the lines, because scientists are just people. They have the same failings as any of us. granted, the majority of them are very clever people, but that is no guarantee of integrity or accuracy. Now, in the comments section of that video, as well as various other forms of communication, I was called a science denier, a climate change denier. Not phrases that I personally would choose to describe myself, but, you know, if that's what people want to call me, I'll wear those titles as a badge of honour, because I see that as being better than being a feckless sheep that just follows whatever I'm told. The process for validating scientific research is fundamentally flawed. It's open to manipulation and corruption, but I've got to admit, when I made that video, I didn't realise just how deep the rot had gone into the scientific community. And then this weekend, an article caught my eye about scientific paper mills. Now that sounds quite innocuous, you know, nothing nasty about that title, a paper mill, until I learned exactly what a scientific paper mill is and just how prevalent it is in the scientific world. It's far worse than I'd ever imagined. Scientific paper mills are for-profit organisations, companies, whatever you want to call them, predominantly situated in China, Russia and some in India. And for a price, they offer a service to scientists. They produce fake, bogus scientific papers for publication in the various scientific journals. I think this has been a problem for a decade or two, but it's reached epidemic proportions over the last 3 years. Now, the stakes are quite high in this, particular industry. A bogus scientific paper can cost upwards of €30,000. That's a huge amount of money. It's a serious business. And any scientist looking to pay that kind of money for a published paper must be looking to make a serious impact on the scientific world. Now, you won't hear politicians talking about the paper mill because, they're always pushing science as justification for what they're pushing us into. And apparently you won't read or hear anything from the mainstream media about this phenomenon because it doesn't really suit their agenda either. But in 2019, it is suspected that approximately 1 million bogus, fake scientific papers were published in scientific journals around the world. Now, from the research that I've done relating to climate change scientific papers and the numbers involved with fake papers, I can't find any information on that whatsoever. There are various other sort of disciplines of science mentioned, but it's radio silence regarding climate change. No one's discussing the possibility of any bogus climate change papers being published anywhere in the world. Now, obviously, as always, I will provide some links to various journals and websites that are reporting on this paper mill issue. Academia is clearly very worried about this industry because some of the published papers discovered were so ridiculous it's embarrassing that they slipped through the net. And they're quick to point out that most of these papers, the authors are from China or Russia or in some cases India. But what they don't make clear is that although the authors originated from those countries, they were producing them for scientists in the Western world. This is an international business. The way it's presented is, in my mind, a little bit disingenuous, but, we're talking about academia here. Now, the various scientific journals are now sort of putting together ways of spotting these fake papers. And as usual, they're turning to software and AI to weed out the fakes. Now, by their own admissions, this isn't particularly effective, and the results at the moment are, to say the least, mixed. Which means although they are weeding some of these fake papers out, a lot must still be getting through. Now, one problem that was highlighted of those that are retracted because they've been found to be fake, because of the way the internet is, it's a labyrinth of dead ends where these fake papers can still exist, they can still be there to be read. They are still being referenced even after they've been found to be false and retracted. Scientists are still citing them in their own research. So it's clear that it is even compromising genuine research and published papers. This is a huge problem. Now, I managed to find one or two YouTube videos on this subject. There are not many, and it would seem that they've also not had many views. So clearly this is not common knowledge with the public. But there was one particular video that caught my eye, and you're not going to believe this. Now, this is not a recent video, it's 4 years old, so clearly these problems have been going on for some time. 3 American scientists were becoming increasingly concerned about political corruption in relation to the publication of scientific papers. This video has had 1 million views, and as I've said, I will post it in the video description down below. They decided to write some papers on the most ridiculous subjects they could conjure up in their minds. I'm not going to talk about the subjects in this video because I fear it may flag up something in the YouTube algorithm which, could result in this video being demonetized or hidden. But they were aimed at a politically charged subject. And they themselves admitted that these papers were so ridiculous, even the opening preface of these particular papers was so ridiculous that there was no way they would get through the filters and be published. And they offered these papers to some of the most eminent journals in the scientific world. Now, they didn't actually carry out any research. The entirety of these papers came from their imaginations in the most ridiculous manner they could think of. And not only were they accepted and published, they received an honour as excellent scholarship. Now, the point that they were trying to prove here was that if it's a politically charged or politically fashionable subject, it's very easy to get even the most ridiculous scientific notions through and published. And let's face it, climate change is probably the most politically charged scientific subject on this planet at the moment. And I think these guys proved conclusively, although that wasn't the subject they were dealing with, that as far as science is concerned, if you just pick the right subject, one that has a big consensus, a big following, you can write pretty much anything you like and it will be accepted. Now, going back to the subject of paper mills, there were various reasons mooted for scientists using these facilities to produce fake papers. And one of those reasons was the publish or perish mentality of academia. If you're not publishing works in journals, you've got no validation. So in order to validate your eminence as a scientist, you must publish as much as possible. Clearly, some are choosing the easy route. Some, it was mooted, are simply chasing fame, and others are looking for an elevation in status that will bring them more money, better grants, better positions in their chosen industry. Corruption is rife in the scientific community, that is clear. And I'm not trying to invalidate science here. What I'm saying is it's by no means as empirical and trustworthy as we're led to believe. I've read several accounts of no-name scientists being involved in this industry, and raising to an eminent status within a very short space of time because of fake papers that have been published in their name. So clearly there is a massive temptation for scientists to do this. But what got me was the attitude of academia. You know, they didn't seem particularly worried about this practice damaging science. One of the things that kept cropping up was that they were worried it would undermine the public's confidence in science. Surely the biggest worry should be that our current understandings of science are compromised through the contamination of these corrupt practices. Or is it just me? Now, politicians all over the Western world are pushing us, normal people as average Joes, down a rabbit hole of depravity, all in the name of net zero, in order to combat global warming that has been presented to us by science. Presented to us as fact. They're expecting us to give up personal transport and freedom to move about freely wherever we want. They're expecting us to pay ridiculous prices for the energy to heat our homes. They're expecting us to eat less food, eat different foods, and pay more for them. To a rational, critical thinking man, a lot of what they're telling us simply doesn't add up. Yet they tell us that we must do it because science says we must do it. Yet clearly, science desperately needs to get its house in order. I'm not saying that climate science is garbage. I'm not saying that climate change doesn't exist. What I'm saying is the principles that have been presented to us for making these ridiculous changes to our lives cannot be trusted on face value. There needs to be more transparency over these scientific findings, and the need to stop this cancel culture, this cancel reaction that takes place when anybody comes forward with an opinion that doesn't agree with theirs. Cancellation is not a rational reaction to a different opinion, providing you've got faith in your own opinions and findings. We've reached a ridiculous state of unquestionable acceptance of everything we're told. Al Gore, who I know is not a scientist, stood up at the last Davos meeting, and amongst other ridiculous claims, he told the audience that our oceans are literally boiling. Now, as far as I'm aware, the oceans are made up of seawater, and seawater has a similar boiling point to fresh water, about 100 degrees centigrade. And in order for atmospheric global warming to heat the oceans up to that temperature, our atmosphere would have to be running at several hundred degrees centigrade, and it would have to have been doing it for hundreds of years to affect that volume of water. It was the most ridiculous comment I've ever heard. Yet it got a standing ovation, an unquestionable acceptance from all those eminent dignitaries that were at that meeting, including Keir Starmer, a man who, unfortunately, is likely to be the UK's next Prime Minister. A man who, in my opinion, is very likely to push us down this net zero rabbit hole harder and faster than we've ever seen before. Don't take the links that are provided in the video description at face value. Use them as a base point for doing your own research. It's a real eye-opener. Once again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this and my other videos, and in doing so, helping to support this channel. You can also support me through Patreon or via the super thanks button down below, or you can just leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you're not already a subscriber. I will of course be back on Friday, so until then, please ride safely, and I'll see you soon.